In 1994, a typographer claimed the world's most used font wasn't designed by its credited creator at all, but by an America's Cup yacht designer 3 decades before Times New Roman existed. It's 1929. The Times of London is printing on a typeface that's over a decade old, thin, dated, and increasingly hard to read at speed. A rising typographer is about to publicly humiliate the paper into changing it. By 1929, Stanley Morrison was Monotype's typographic advisor, a mostly self-taught historian of printing who'd spent the decade reviving old typefaces like Bembo and Baskerville. That year, he publicly criticized the Times printing as antiquated and poorly suited to a modern newspaper. The paper took the challenge seriously and brought him on to fix it. Morrison chose an existing monotype face, Plantain, as his structural starting point, then pushed it towards something more robust and compact. He penciled the initial letter forms himself and handed them to Victor Lardent, a draughtsman in the paper's advertising department, whose firm, lean line work he trusted to execute the vision. Monotype's punch cutters spent roughly 2 years refining the design. Morrison later claimed more than 14,750 individual punches were cut for the project. On October 3, 1932, the new type appeared on the Times front page for the first time, the first newspaper in the world to commission its own exclusive typeface. It was hailed as Morrison's triumph. 6 decades later, that story would be challenged. Morrison's brief had 2 competing demands: fit more words into the Times' narrow newspaper columns and keep every letter legible when printed at speed on cheap, absorbent paper. His solution was to raise the X height, the height of lowercase letters like A, E, and N, relative to capital letters, which makes small type read more clearly even when compressed. He based the overall structure on Plantain, an older monotype rival, but narrowed the letter forms and sharpened the contrast between thick and thin strokes, giving the face a crisp, high-contrast look that held up under the harsh mechanical printing of the era. The result sits in what typographers call a transitional style, straddling the humanist warmth of old-style faces like Garamond and the severe geometry of later modern faces like Bodoni. It's neither soft nor stark, which is precisely why it reads as neutral, a workhorse built to disappear into the page rather than announce itself. So how does a font built to vanish end up impossible to escape? After its 1932 debut, the Times held exclusive rights to the design for a set period before licensing it out over the following decades, becoming a staple in books, newspapers, and government publishing. But the moment that made it inescapable came 6 decades later. In 1992, Microsoft licensed Times New Roman from Monotype and bundled it as a core font in Windows 3.1. When Microsoft Word became the dominant word processor of the 1990s, Times New Roman was set as its default typeface, meaning that for 15 straight years, from 1992 to 2007, anyone who opened a blank Word document was typing in it by default, whether they'd chosen it or not. Apple bundled a close cousin with early Macintosh systems, too. Academic style guides, including APA and MLA, formally recommended it for manuscripts and papers. A font commissioned to solve one newspaper's column width problem in 1932 had, without anyone really deciding it should, become the default voice of the modern written word. In 1994, printing historian Mike Parker dropped a bombshell in the journal Printing History. He argued Times New Roman's Roman letter forms weren't Morrison's original work at all, but derived from a 1904 design by William Starling Burgess, an American better known for building America's Cup racing yachts and working with the Wright brothers on early aircraft. Parker even released a modern typeface called Starling, built from the disputed drawings, to make his case. 4 years later, historian Nicholas Barker published a detailed rebuttal in the same journal, showing that key pieces of Parker's evidence didn't hold up, including several supposed Burgess letter forms that their own designer confirmed were made decades later. Monotype's official history has never acknowledged the Burgess claim. To this day,
type historians remain split on whether Morrison's masterpiece was truly his. Microsoft finally dropped it as Word's default in 2007, replacing it with Calibri, then Aptos in 2023, both designed for legibility on glowing screens rather than ink on paper. Yet Times New Roman never really left. It's still required in countless legal filings, dissertations, and government forms worldwide. And here's the twist. In 2014, a 14-year-old science fair study found that switching U.S. federal printing from Times New Roman to the lighter Garamond could save close to $400 million a year in ink. A typeface born to save space on a 1932 newsprint column turned out, on modern paper, to be one of the thirstiest fonts in your drop-down menu. Tomorrow, we're covering a font that was designed to be intentionally, chaotically ugly, and somehow became one of the most licensed typefaces on Earth. Subscribe so you don't miss it.